Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, Hampton Roads soldiers will soon head to Gaza to deliver food. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh brings us the latest on that. The waters of Virginia's Middle Peninsula are rising above septic systems. WHRO's Katherine Hafner says a local partnership is working on a solution. And former Congresswoman Liz Cheney spoke at the Norfolk Forum Tuesday night. I had the chance to sit down with her to discuss what she expects in the upcoming November presidential election.
I'm hearing from people all across the country, and thousands of them, that, they understand how important this election is.
It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. Williamsburg and James City County residents are divided on whether breaking up their joint school district is the best solution. WHRO's Ryan Murphy spoke with both parties.
Kate Maxlow is one of the education consultants hired by the city of Williamsburg to study an independent school district and gather resident feedback.
Though respondents were divided on whether the best solution was to create an independent school division, most did agree that the current student achievement of City of Williamsburg students was unacceptable and some kind of intervention is needed.
Students coming from Williamsburg lag behind the performance of James City County students at every level. Those city students are also more likely to be minorities or economically disadvantaged than those who live in the county. The feasibility study says that may mean an independent Williamsburg school district would need more resources to improve student outcomes. Residents say they've got lots of lingering questions about an independent Williamsburg district, like what it would cost taxpayers. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
We should mention the Williamsburg-James City County School District is a stakeholder in HRETA, which holds the license for the WHRO broadcast stations. Hampton Roads troops are nearly ready to begin delivering food aid to Gaza. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says they've been building a pier off the coast in the Mediterranean.
The Army's 7th Transportation Brigade, with help from Navy support ships, has been assembling a dock 2 miles off the coast of Gaza. Troops will ferry aid to a floating pier anchored to the shore, says Salvador Mercogliano, a former merchant mariner who teaches at Campbell University in North Carolina.
They're going to have to work on maintenance on the vessels. So this is going to be a grueling operation if it goes on for 90 days of full-fledged movement of cargo.
Security is a major concern, he says. The flow of aid will also depend on weather conditions in the eastern Mediterranean. The U.S. hopes to unload 90 truckloads of cargo a day. Roughly 1,000 troops are involved in the operation, a majority of them from Hampton Roads. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Virginia Beach's new Arts All Over program brings mainstream performances to neighborhoods, making the arts more accessible for the city's residents. Kate Nowak reports for WHRO.
Similar programs in cities like Chicago, New York, and D.C. have made major impacts on neighborhoods and cities themselves. Here's Hillary Plate from the Virginia Beach Cultural Affairs Department about the initiative.
People who don't always feel comfortable coming to the theater to see a big musical, people maybe that have transportation limitations or financial limitations or time limitations.
Plate often sees attendees venturing from free shows into the bigger, pricier venues to support local and touring artists. That increases ticket sales and creates an economic boost. Kate Nowak, WHRO News.
You'll find upcoming performances in Virginia Beach's Arts All Over program at virginiabeach.gov. Chesapeake's Regional Medical Center performed its first open heart surgery last week. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson reports how it took more than 5 years for the hospital to reach this point.
Surgeon Edward Coleman led Chesapeake Regional's open heart surgical team through the hospital's first coronary artery bypass procedure.
We've been together for months now doing just this, so we felt very confident that we'd accomplished everything we needed to do to be able to provide the care for the patient.
Coleman helped build the staff of the hospital's new cardiothoracic program. Chesapeake Regional had to ask the Virginia Department of Health twice for permission to perform such procedures. Centera fought the first application, which was denied. Chesapeake challenged the denial up to the state Supreme Court and won its case. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
Rising waters are overtaking home septic systems on Virginia's rural Middle Peninsula. That can cause sewage to back up in people's homes and yards, threatening residents' health and the environment. WHRO's Katherine Hafner reports on a new local partnership working on a solution.
Jamie Miller is the guy you call when something goes wrong with the least glamorous part of your home. He gets calls like,
I can't flush my toilet. I have sewage, backing up in my house. Or their yard smells like sewage, which wouldn't be fun.
Miller repairs septic systems. He was born into the sewage business.
My grandparents started a septic business called Miller's Septic Tank Service in 1973.
And now it's busier than ever. Miller says he's seen more and more septic failures.
And they're failing because of old systems and rising sea levels.
As sea levels rise, the groundwater is rising too. That's swamping traditional septic systems, which rely on soil to do much of the dirty work of breaking down sewage. When you flush your toilet using one of these systems, everything is carried through pipes to an underground septic tank in the yard. Heavy solids sink to the bottom. Everything else slowly trickles out into the soil, called the drain field. But as groundwater rises, that drain field can't do its job, Miller says.
Soils can only be saturated by so much, and once they're saturated, they won't take any more water. And so it has to come to the surface, and then it just ends up running across the ground. It ends up making your yard look like a big marsh.
A stinky marsh, full of bacteria that can cause health issues, and pollute local waterways, and just make it hard to live. Communities from Miami to New England are dealing with growing septic failures, but southeastern Virginia is experiencing the highest rate of sea level rise on the East Coast. That makes places like the Middle Peninsula particularly vulnerable.
There is a reason why the soil scientists and the septic industry calls it the septic repair capital of the East Coast.
That's Louis Lawrence, a lifetime local resident who's seen the issue firsthand.
There are times during the wet season, as children, you're taught don't flush. That's the unfortunate part of living with the water.
Lawrence now leads the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission and has made it his priority to protect the community from rising waters. That includes spearheading a new pilot project in Gloucester.
And so what we're doing here is building out a complete demonstration of our system.
Aaron Forbes-Stokes leads research and development for Triangle Environmental. He says they're hoping to basically reinvent the modern septic system to withstand sea level rise.
Our biggest goal with this system is pretty much to let people just to remain living where they live, even under the threat of changing climate conditions.
Instead of releasing mostly untreated sewage directly into soil, this new system adds a middleman, an above-ground treatment tank. The company's testing their solution at an empty home, where it all starts with a flush.
The lower flush volume, as this might is keyed. And
the waste runs through the pipes into the septic tank out in the yard. But then, instead of being released straight into the soil, the waste is pumped to a new elevated treatment system. It looks like a utility closet about the size of a refrigerator. Inside, a mix of filters and chemicals disinfect the wastewater. The result is water clean enough to be reused, says Tate Rogers. He's Triangle's founder.
It would look like very clear water that you can do pretty much anything with except drink.
The filtration process isn't new, but the way they're using it is small enough to work at your home and elevated enough to escape flooding. Triangle will run the pilot through this fall to make sure everything works as intended. They've hired a local Army veteran, Nick Barnes, to help test the system. He's taking the job seriously.
If I have to use the bathroom or take a shower, I'll wait and come and do it here. And I've started doing my laundry here and stuff.
And Barnes has been surprised by the interest of others in the community.
Because I was like, who wants to talk about sewage? But apparently everybody does.
Their project is funded by a unique partnership, including the state and nonprofits such as Rise Resilience Innovations in Norfolk. Ultimately, Triangle hopes to start selling the system, starting on the Middle Peninsula. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Norfolk and Portsmouth residents, have you noticed a change to the local skyline? What's that all about? WHRO's Ryan Murphy took a look.
A large ship with a massive crane appeared in the Norfolk and Portsmouth skylines last weekend, lighting up the night. But what is it, and what is it for? The ship is the Orion, a 700-foot-long heavy lift vessel that arrived at the Portsmouth Marine Terminal at the end of April. It sports a nearly 300-foot-tall crane, which dwarfs the blue container cranes at the Port of Virginia facility next door. Dominion Energy will use the Orion and its crane to move monopiles for 176 offshore wind turbines. It'll start with 6 monopiles, representing the foundations for 6 turbines. The ship will head off of Virginia Beach, where crews will sink the steel structures into the ocean floor over the course of a few days. The Orion will be visible coming in and out of port regularly between now and the end of October. Dominion can't work past that time because of migrating North Atlantic right whales. If the utility company can't sink all its monopiles this year, the Orion will return next May after the whales have finished their annual migrations. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Most states in the Chesapeake Bay watershed will not meet federal pollution standards by a 2025 deadline. But there is a bit of good news. As WHRO's Katherine Hafner reports, there has been progress in Virginia.
Virginia and other states that touch the Bay have been working for over a decade to reduce pollution from things like agriculture and sewage plants. They're racing to meet 2025 benchmarks set by the Environmental Protection Agency. Officials have already acknowledged that won't happen. Here's Hillary Falk with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation last year.
We have a lot of work to do to restore clean water to the Chesapeake Bay and address the impacts of climate change.
Since then, the Chesapeake Bay program says Virginia has fully achieved targets on pollution specifically from sediment, which often happens from erosion. But the Commonwealth still needs to reduce more nitrogen and phosphorus. Those nutrients wash off farms or urban land and make the water less livable for marine plants and animals. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
One sailor remains hospitalized in stable condition after 2 Marine hovercraft from the Norfolk-based USS Wasp collided during an exercise. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh has more.
The Navy says 35 sailors and Marines were injured when 2 craft collided in the waters off Florida Thursday. Most of the injured were treated at local hospitals or on board the USS Wasp and USS New York. One sailor was flown to the Naval Hospital at Portsmouth and remains in stable condition. 2 weeks ago, 2 of the same hovercraft involved in the incident, called LCACs, came ashore on a beach at Camp Lejeune. The craft carry equipment, vehicles, and Marines. It was part of the final exercise for the USS Wasp and the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. The Amphibious Ready Group has been scheduled to leave for the Eastern Mediterranean at the end of the month. The Navy would not comment on how the deployment will be affected. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
William & Mary is seeking state approval for a new bachelor's program in marine science. WHRO's Katherine Hafner explained why the university is taking this step.
The public university would be the first in Virginia to offer a marine science degree to undergraduate students. William & Mary already has master's and doctoral marine science programs, as well as a minor. School officials say they've seen interest in those undergrad courses nearly triple over the last few years. They believe that's because of growing concerns about climate change and its impacts in coastal areas like Hampton Roads. William & Mary's Board of Visitors recently approved plans for the bachelor's program. Now they need approval from the State Council for Higher Education. The university hopes to launch the program next fall. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
A new group of Hampton Roads leaders believes talking outside official channels could help solve some of the region's toughest issues. WHRO's Ryan Murphy breaks it down.
Hampton Roads leaders visit other regions annually to learn about how they're tackling the same problems we're facing here. On a trip to Charlotte a few years back, a regional group that was really setting the agenda for that metro area caught some officials' eyes. Now, leaders frustrated with a lack of progress on big issues in Hampton Roads are following that group's lead.
But it takes intentionality, it takes organization, it takes leadership, and sometimes it takes bold leadership, because change comes hard, generally. Change in Hampton Roads is really hard.
That's Brian Stevens, who runs the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce. Stevens and leaders of other regional groups have started meeting semi-formally as the regional organization's President's Council. The closed-door meetings are invite-only, and the frank discussions aren't for public consumption. The group wants to turn conversation into regional action on topics like housing and outmigration. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Former Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney spoke Tuesday night at the Norfolk Forum. She is a 3-term member of the House of Representatives from Wyoming, and she rose to the number 3 leadership position, chair of the House Republican Caucus, until January 6, 2021 happened. She voted for impeachment over the January 6th Capitol riot and was stripped of her party position, then lost a 2022 primary race to a candidate supported by former President Trump. She served as vice chair of the January 6th committee, and that's where I picked up the conversation. You will be in Norfolk, presumably at the invitation of the Norfolk Forum, but you've been traveling and speaking in many places around the country. What are you hearing in your travels about November?
Yeah, I'm hearing from people all across the country and thousands of them that they understand how important this election is, and I think that there's a real hunger that people feel for our politics to reflect sort of the seriousness and the substance of the issues we're facing. People understand the gravity, the seriousness of the potential for a second Trump term and the danger of that. And I think there really is just a sense of, they know the nation faces big issues both here at home and also internationally, and they want elected officials, they want leaders who are going to, frankly, act like adults and provide the kind of leadership that is worthy of the nation and up to facing the challenges that we face.
Last week, the former president would not commit to accepting results of the 2024 election. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen the same thing from him again and again and again, and he's not hiding what he would do if he were reelected. He has attempted to really tear down our democratic process, and I always think about the fact that the very things that our adversaries say about democracy, the things that the Chinese Communist Party, for example, says about our democracy, are the same things that Donald Trump says about our democracy. And we've never before had a president of either party who refused to guarantee the peaceful transition of power. And so now facing this situation with a president who won't respect the sanctity of our election process and who continues to lie, I think it's one more example of why he can't be reelected. And I think it's important for people to look back and remember, what we showed during the January 6th committee hearings, which is that, he knows what he's saying isn't true because everyone, of the top leadership of his campaign, the top lawyers in the White House, the top lawyers in the Justice Department, we have very specific days and times when they told him that each of the very specific claims he was making were just simply false, and yet he went out and said it anyway. So it's more of the same lies, and I think that we need to hold him accountable, and we also need to hold accountable elected officials who are repeating the lies, repeating the claims, and they too know that these claims are false.
We keep hearing that many Republicans in Congress privately would disparage the former president and yet support him and the movement publicly. Congressman Kinzinger has talked about threats to him and his family. What part does fear make in that decision to support the movement and the former president?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think we've absolutely are in a situation where the former president is attempting to use the threat of violence, attempting to use fear to get people to be quiet or to convince people that they shouldn't oppose him. I certainly had members of Congress say very directly to me that, they believed, for example, he should be impeached, but they were afraid of the threat of violence against their family if they took such a public stand as voting to impeach Donald Trump after January 6th. And I think, again, this is a place where we really can find and and should find bipartisan agreement, that violence doesn't have any role in our politics. It can't. And so we've had in the past, obviously, different groups that might have tried to use violence, threats, intimidation, but we've never had a president doing it. We've never had a president, a nominee of one of our major parties, as we do now, attempting to do it. And you see the same thing in the same way that he's treating the judiciary with, the threats of violence against the family members of judges, the threats against, people who will be witnesses in these trials. It just all combines to tell you that he believes he's above the law and he's willing to tear the country apart if it helps him seize power again.
What part is Russia playing in our political activities these days?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point as well. Clearly, we saw in the 2016 election, and people ought to go back and look at the Senate the Senate Intelligence Committee report that was done when the Republicans had the majority. So this is a bipartisan report about the role of Russia in 2016 and the very specific relationships between people like Paul Manafort of the Trump campaign and key members of the Russian intelligence operation. So we know they've played a role in the past. We know that their role extends from attempting to influence the outcome in certain instances to attempting to sow disagreement and dissension. They've got these troll farms that, where they basically pretend to be someone else online on social media platforms. And what we've seen is that in many cases where there's real dissension going on in the country, you'll see foreign adversaries, including the Russians, try to sow that dissension from both sides of particular issues. And so I think we really need to make sure to protect ourselves from that, to be aware that's going on. And I think, there's no question, but if you look at Donald Trump and the extent to which he praises people like Putin, he praises people like Orban, the far-right leader of Hungary. He refused for a long time to support aid to Ukraine. It's very clear when he does things like welcome Russia to invade our NATO allies, that he has got alliances and allegiances in many ways that clearly are counter to America's national interest.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Katherine Hafner, Steve Walsh, Ryan Murphy, Michelle Hankerson, and Kate Nowak. Also Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.